Okay, welcome to the quiz explanations for Quiz 4-2. I'm just going to quickly go through the 5 problems from Quiz 4-2 so you can see how each problem should have been done. On 4-2, we are coming up with equivalent expressions using the commutative property and the associative property. And then we also talked about the distributive property as well. So here we go. This is question 1. It asks which expression is equivalent to 4h divided by 5. Well, all we really need to notice is each of these is a fraction. The fraction bar itself is the divide, but I have to keep things in the same order for a division problem. So the 4h has to be divided by a 5, and if we look at our choices, this is a 5h, so that one's out. This is 4 divided by a 5h, but it's supposed to be a 4h divided by a 5. That is not correct. 5 divided by, that's not correct, so it's got to be choice D. And if we look at it, this is 4h over a 5, and that bar right there means divide, so that's 4h divided by 5. So there is question 1. Question 2, it asks me to use properties of operations to write an expression equivalent to the expression below. And if we look at this, we have a p divided by 6, a plus, and then we have a q plus 8 in parentheses. So one of the properties we talked about was the commutative property, which means I can move the numbers and variables around in an addition or a multiplication situation. And then the associative property says that I can regroup things if I desire, if that would make it easier to do. We don't know what P is or Q is, so there's regrouping or rearranging stuff isn't going to serve much of a purpose, but we can actually determine whether these are equivalent to it or not. So here we have a Q plus 8, and on choice A it says 8Q, but that's multiplying. This said adding, so that is not correct. This is saying that the p divided by 6 and the q are getting multiplied by an 8, but that is not what is going on in this, so that is not correct. This one, it appears as though the only change is that the parentheses have been put around the p plus 6, or p divided by 6 and the q, instead of the q and the 8. And since there's adding going on, adding is associative. So the parentheses can be moved, it can be regrouped. So this is correct. If we look at the last choice, it doesn't really make sense here. Taking p and dividing it by 6 is not the same as taking 6 times p. So that one's out. So that one was choice C. So let's move on to question 3. It asks what number makes the expressions equivalent, and it may not be super clear. I'll rewrite it here. This is a 1/2, and then there's a parenthesis, negative 1.4 m plus 0.4, and that is equal to something m plus 0.2. And if we notice, there's parentheses here, but not over here. And so what has happened is the distributive property has been used. The distributive property says this number times that, and this number times that. So if we look at it, this plus 0.2 that's in my problem right here is half of 0.4. That's where that 0.2 is coming in. So this number that's in front of the m is going to be half of negative 1.4. Well, half of negative 1.4 is negative 0.7. It's half of 14 with a dot in the middle, basically. So this is negative 0.7. If you distribute the half, it just gets multiplied by both terms on the inside. So let's move on to question 4. Question 4, we don't have to do any work here. We just need to know what the commutative property is. The commutative property, to write an equivalent expression, the commutative property says I can move things around. So that only works in adding and multiplying. So one change I could do, I wouldn't really want to, but I could move this negative 5 in this d and switch places and then put the plus half. Or I could use the commutative property and switch these two terms that have an addition between them. So I could put the half at the beginning And then here's the critical thing. There's a negative on that 5, so if I'm going to put the half at the beginning, I have to keep that negative 5 in front of the d, or else I'm changing the value of it. For it to be equivalent, it can't change the value. So if I put the half first, I have to write that as a minus 5d. I could do plus and negative, but it's more efficient to just write minus 5d. So that's what I'm looking for, and there it is right there. 1/2 minus 5d. The commutative property says I can move things around in an addition problem. It would also work for multiplication, but that was not one of our choices here. A common wrong answer is to put this right here and forget about the negative that's on that 5. That negative has to go with it. So if you're moving it around, that negative stays with it. So one more question to do, question 5. Question 5, we're going to go through and answer yes or no on each one of these. And we're wanting to know if it's equivalent. So it's got to be equivalent. It's got to be the same value. So if we look at it, the original one, so we have negative 4/3 p minus 2/5. So if we move things around, some things have to stay together. So this negative 4/3 has to be in front of a p. Has to. It can't be moved around. This is stuck together. And then this minus 2/5, this negative has to be in front of the 2/5. And so let's go through and look at our choices. If we look at the first choice, we have a negative 2/5, and that's what we have over here. And we have a negative 4/3 p, and that's what we have here. So this is a yes. This one works. Let's look at the second one. We have a positive 2/5, but it's supposed to have a negative with it. So this one's wrong by default, right off the bat. 2/5 has to have a negative with it. If we look at this next one, negative 2/5, but it has a p with it, and that is not what the original term has. So this one doesn't work either. It should not have a p with that negative 2/5, so that's a no on that one. And then this one has a negative 4/3 p, which is negative 4/3 p, and then it's plus a negative 2/5. Adding a negative 2/5 is exactly the same as subtracting 2/5. So this one is a yes because it has a negative 4/3 p, which is what the original had, and then it had a negative 2/5, or adding a negative 2/5 is the exact same thing as subtracting 2/5. So those are the 5 questions from Quiz 4-2. I hope that helped you understand them.